Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Wait 3 seconds, the fluorescent lights above my cubicle flickered with their usual dying wheeze as I settled into another graveyard shift at Meridian Customer Solutions. The call center stretched out before me like a maze of identical gray partitions, most of them empty at this hour. Only a handful of us worked the overnight customer service line for various insurance companies, handling claims from different time zones and the occasional drunk dial from someone who couldn't sleep. I've been doing this job for 3 years, ever since dropping out of college. The pay was decent enough to cover my studio apartment and ramen noodle lifestyle, and the night shift meant I rarely had to deal with management breathing down my neck. Just me, my headset, and whatever problems people needed to dump on a stranger's voicemail at 2 a.m. My name is Marcus, and I thought I'd heard every possible variation of human misery that could be transmitted through a phone line. Insurance claims have a way of bringing out the worst in people, the desperation, the anger, the grief. But nothing had prepared me for the call that came through on Tuesday, October 13th, at exactly 3:17 a.m. The phone rang with its standard electronic trill, and I glanced at my screen to see which company's line it was coming through. The display showed Meridian Internal, which was odd, since that designation was usually reserved for calls between departments or system tests. I figured it was probably a mistake in the routing system. Those happened more often than our IT department cared to admit. Thank you for calling customer service. This is Marcus speaking. How can I help you today? Silence stretched across the line, broken only by what sounded like static or maybe breathing. I waited the standard 10 seconds before trying again. Hello, this is Marcus with customer service. Are you there? I know where you work, Marcus. The voice was wrong, not just threatening, though it certainly was that, but wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. It sounded like it was coming from very far away, distorted and hollow, as if the speaker was talking through a long tunnel filled with water. But underneath that distortion was something worse, a familiarity I couldn't place, like hearing your own voice played back on a recording but knowing it wasn't you speaking. I'm sorry, but this line is for insurance claims only. If you're trying to reach someone specific, I can transfer you to our main directory. You live at 1247 Oakwood Street, apartment 3B. My blood went cold. Company policy was strict about never giving out personal information, and our home addresses weren't supposed to be accessible through any customer-facing systems. I glanced around the nearly empty call center, but my supervisor Janet was in the break room, and the only other person on shift was Tommy, 3 rows over with his headphones practically welded to his skull. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to call this number again. This line is for legitimate insurance claims only. The red Honda Civic in parking spot 12, Illinois plates. GHT-4429. That was my car. That was my exact license plate number. I should have hung up immediately. Company protocol was clear about threatening calls, disconnect, file a report, let security handle it. But something kept me on the line. Maybe it was the strange quality of that voice, or maybe it was the growing certainty that this wasn't just some random creep who'd gotten hold of my information. Who is this? I whispered. You know who this is, Marcus. You've always known. The line went dead. I sat staring at my computer screen for a long time, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to process what had just happened. The call log showed the conversation had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, but it felt like it had been both much longer and much shorter than that. More disturbing was the fact that when I tried to pull up the call details, the system showed no record of any call coming through at 3:17 a.m. I filed an incident report anyway, describing the threatening nature of the call and the fact that the caller had somehow obtained my personal information. Janet read it over when she came back from her break, frowning at the screen. You sure about these details, Marcus? The system's not showing any record of this call. I'm positive. Check the phone logs or the security recordings. Someone called the internal line and knew my address, my car, everything. Janet pulled up several different monitoring systems, her frown deepening with each search. Nothing here, hun. No calls to your extension between 3 o'clock and 3:30. Are you feeling okay? You've been working a lot of overtime lately. I wanted to argue, to insist that I wasn't losing my mind, but the evidence was right there on her screen. According to every system Meridian had, no call had taken place. But I could still hear that voice echoing in my head, could still feel the chill that had run down my spine when he'd recited my license plate number. The rest of my shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the phone rang, I tensed up, expecting to hear that hollow, distorted voice again. When 7 a.m. finally arrived, I practically sprinted to the parking garage. My red Honda was exactly where I'd left it, in spot 12, looking perfectly normal in the gray morning light. I did a quick walk around anyway, checking for signs that someone had been messing with it, but everything seemed fine. Still, I couldn't help glancing in my rearview mirror more than usual during the drive home. I lived in a converted warehouse that had been chopped up into cheap studio apartments, the kind of place where you minded your own business and hoped your neighbors did the same. The building had a security door that was supposed to require a key card, but it had been broken for months and management didn't seem in any hurry to fix it. As I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Apartment 3B was exactly as I'd left it, a sparse collection of second-hand furniture, my gaming setup, and a kitchen that consisted mainly of a hot plate and a mini fridge. I dead-bolted the door behind me and checked that the windows were locked before finally allowing myself to relax. Maybe Janet was right. Maybe I had been working too much overtime and the stress was getting to me. Maybe I dozed off at my desk and the whole thing had been some kind of weird dream. It wouldn't be the first time the night shift had played tricks on my mind. I managed to get about 5 hours of sleep before my alarm went off, and I felt almost normal as I got ready for another shift. The threatening call seemed less real in the afternoon light, more like something that had happened to someone else. I even managed to convince myself that I'd probably misremembered some of the details, or that it had been a prank call from someone who'd gotten lucky with their guesses about my personal information. That confidence lasted until 3:17 a.m. The phone rang at exactly the same time as the night before, and my stomach dropped as I saw Meridian Internal appear on my screen again. I let it ring 4 times before finally answering. "Customer service, this is Marcus. You didn't sleep well last night." It was the same voice, the same hollow distortion that seemed to come from somewhere impossibly far away. But this time I was ready for it. I'd already pulled up the call recording software on my computer, determined to get proof of what was happening. "Who is this? How did you get this number? You kept checking the locks, the door, the windows. You checked them 3 times before you finally went to bed." My mouth went dry. I lived alone, and my apartment faced the interior courtyard of the building. For someone to have seen me checking the locks, they would have had to be inside my apartment with me. "You're lying, blue boxers with the hole in the left side. You should throw those away, Marcus. They're not flattering." I looked down at my lap, and sure enough, I was wearing my old blue boxers. The ones with the small tear near the seam that I kept meaning to replace but never got around to. No one could have seen them unless you were in my apartment. I'm always in your apartment, Marcus. Just like I'm always at your work, just like I'm always in your car, you just don't usually notice me. The recording software on my computer showed that it was capturing audio, but when I glanced at the waveform display, it was completely flat. No sound was being recorded despite the fact that I could hear the voice clearly through my headset. "What do you want? I want you to remember." "Remember what? You know what you did." "You know why I'm here. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never hurt anyone. I've never." October 13th, 2019, 4 years ago today. Do you remember what happened 4 years ago today, Marcus? The date hit me like a physical blow. October 13th, 2019. I knew that date, had spent years trying to forget it, but how could this caller possibly know about that? I'd never told anyone, never filed a police report, never even talked about it in therapy. "I don't know what you mean, liar." The words seemed to echo through the phone line, multiplying and distorting until it sounded like a chorus of voices all calling me a liar in unison. I ripped off my headset and threw it down on my desk, but I could still hear the voice, now seeming to come from the air around me. "You can't hang up on me, Marcus. You can't disconnect this call." I looked at my computer screen and saw that the call was still showing as active, despite the fact that my headset was lying on the desk. The timer continued to count up. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. "What do you want from me? I want you to say it. I want you to admit what you did." I didn't do anything, but even as I said it, the memories were flooding back. October 13th, 2019. I'd been driving home from a party, probably over the legal limit but not drunk enough to call an Uber. It was raining and the roads were slick, and I'd been texting someone, I couldn't even remember who now. Just for a second, just long enough to send a quick reply. When I looked up, the pedestrian was already in my headlights. "I want you to say his name. Stop. Say his name, Marcus. Please just stop. David Chen." 23 years old, he was walking home from his job at the movie theater. He was going to propose to his girlfriend the next weekend. Say his name. I'd never known the name before. The news reports had been brief, just a few lines about a hit-and-run accident on Maple Street. The police had never found the driver. I'd gotten my car fixed at a shop 3 towns over, paid cash, told them I'd hit a deer. "David Chen," I whispered, louder. "David Chen. Tell me what you did to David Chen." The words came out in a rush, 4 years of guilt and shame and sleepless nights pouring out of me in a confession I'd never been able to make to another living soul. I told him about the texting, about the rain, about the sickening thud when David's body hit my windshield. I told him about driving home in shock, about the lies I'd told myself, about how it wasn't really my fault, about how I'd convinced myself that calling the police wouldn't bring David back anyway. When I finished, the call center was completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Tommy typing at his keyboard. I looked at my computer screen and saw that the call had finally disconnected. The timer showed it had lasted exactly 23 minutes. 23 minutes, the same age David Chen had been when I killed him. I called in sick for the rest of the week, claiming food poisoning. I couldn't bring myself to sit in that cubicle, waiting for 3:17 a.m. to roll around again. Instead, I spent the time researching David Chen online, learning about the life I'd cut short. He'd been a film student at the community college, working nights at the movie theater to pay for his classes. His girlfriend, Sarah, had started a scholarship fund in his memory. His parents had moved back to Taiwan after the funeral, unable to bear staying in the town where their son had died. The police case was still technically open, but it had gone cold years ago. I thought about turning myself in. I wrote confession letters that I never sent, looked up the phone numbers for the police department and the district attorney's office. But every time I got close to making the call, I'd lose my nerve. What good would it do now? David was still dead, and destroying my own life wouldn't change that. By the time I returned to work the following Tuesday, I'd almost convinced myself that the calls had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Guilt manifesting itself in auditory delusions, my subconscious mind finally forcing me to confront what I'd done. It made more sense than the alternative. The night shift felt different when I returned. The call center seemed darker somehow, the shadows between the cubicles deeper and more threatening. Tommy had called in sick, so I was the only customer service rep on duty, alone except for Janet and the security guard who made his rounds every few hours. I made it all the way to 3:16 a.m. before my phone rang. This time I didn't hesitate. I answered on the first ring, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Hello, David. Hello, Marcus. I was wondering when you'd figure it out." The voice was clearer now, less distorted. It sounded like what I imagined a 23-year-old film student might sound like, intelligent, a little sarcastic, with just a hint of the hurt and confusion that must have been his last emotions. "What happens now? Now you have a choice. You can turn yourself in, tell the police what really happened that night, face the consequences of what you did. And if I don't, then I keep calling, every night at 3:17 a.m. The exact time you hit me, and eventually the calls won't be enough." "What do you mean? You've seen me in your peripheral vision, haven't you? In your apartment, in your car, here at work. Little glimpses of movement that disappear when you turn to look directly." He was right. I had been seeing things, shadows that moved wrong, reflections in windows that didn't match what should have been there, the constant feeling of being watched. "It'll get worse, Marcus. I'll get stronger, more solid, and when I'm strong enough, when I can finally touch the physical world again, well, let's just say that David Chen is going to want some payback." The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear something that might have been breathing or might have been the sound of wind through trees. "You have until Halloween, Marcus, 2.5 weeks. Turn yourself in by Halloween night, or I'll come for you myself. And if I quit this job and leave town, you can't run from me. I'm not tied to this place, I'm tied to you. Your guilt brought me back, and your guilt keeps me here. The only way to break that connection is to face what you did." The call ended, but this time I wasn't surprised when the computer showed no record of it. David wasn't calling through the phone system. He was calling through something much deeper, some connection forged in the moment when my car had ended his life. Over the next 2 weeks, the manifestations got stronger. I'd see him standing at the end of my bed when I woke up, translucent but unmistakably there. He'd be sitting in my passenger seat when I got in my car, visible in the rearview mirror but gone when I turned around. At work, I'd catch glimpses of him walking between the cubicles, his film student clothes, jeans, and a vintage movie theater t-shirt, becoming more solid each night. The calls continued every night at 3:17 a.m., but they were shorter now, just David reminding me of the deadline. Sometimes he'd tell me more about his life, about the girlfriend who still visited his grave every week, about the movies he'd never get to make, about the future I'd stolen from him. I tried to work up the courage to turn myself in. I really did. I drove to the police station 3 different times, sat in the parking lot for hours, but I could never make myself get out of the car. I wasn't brave enough to face the consequences of what I'd done, wasn't strong enough to accept the punishment I deserved. Halloween night arrived gray and cold, with a steady drizzle that reminded me uncomfortably of the night I'd killed David Chen. I called in sick to work, spending the day pacing around my apartment, jumping at every shadow. As the sun set, I realized I'd made my choice through inaction. I wasn't going to turn myself in. At 11:59 p.m., I was sitting on my couch, staring at the door and waiting for whatever was going to happen. The digital clock on my cable box flipped to 12 o'clock, and the temperature in my apartment plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs as David materialized in front of me, no longer translucent but solid and real. He looked exactly like the photos I'd found online, young Asian, with kind eyes that were now filled with a cold fury. "Time's up, Marcus. David, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. Sorry doesn't bring me back. Sorry doesn't give me the life you took." He was right, of course. Sorry was just a word, meaningless in the face of what I'd done. I'd had 4 years to feel sorry, and it hadn't been enough to make me do the right thing. "What are you going to do to me?" David smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. "I'm going to give you exactly what you gave me. A sudden, violent end, but unlike me, you'll know it's coming." He reached out with hands that looked solid but felt like ice, grasping my shoulders and pulling me to my feet. His touch burned with cold, and I could feel something fundamental changing in my body, as if my very life force was being drained away. "Wait," I gasped. What if I turn myself in now?" "Tonight," David paused, his grip loosening slightly. "It's too late for that, Marcus. You had your chance. But what if I do more than that? What if I tell Sarah the truth? What if I make sure your story gets told, make sure people remember David Chen for who he was, not just as a hit-and-run victim?" For a moment, something flickered in David's eyes, not forgiveness, but perhaps a recognition that justice could take different forms. "You do that, you'd face the consequences, tell everyone what you did." "Yes, I swear it. I'll turn myself in tomorrow morning, and I'll make sure Sarah knows the truth. I'll make sure your story gets told." David stared at me for a long moment, his cold hands still gripping my shoulders. Then slowly he released me. "You have until sunrise, Marcus. If you haven't walked into that police station by dawn, I'll be back, and next time there won't be any negotiations." He faded away, leaving me alone in my apartment with the weight of a promise I wasn't sure I had the strength to keep. I spent the rest of the night writing. I wrote a full confession, detailing everything that had happened on October 13th, 2019. I wrote a letter to Sarah, David's girlfriend, explaining who I was and what I'd done. I wrote letters to David's parents, to the police, to the local newspaper. By the time the sun started to rise, I had a stack of envelopes ready to be delivered. At 7 a.m., I walked into the police station and asked to speak to a detective about a hit-and-run case from 2019. The confession poured out of me in a rush, 4 years of guilt and fear finally finding their voice. The detective listened with a mixture of surprise and professional skepticism, but the details I provided, the exact location, the time, the damage to my car, were enough to convince him I was telling the truth. They arrested me, of course, vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident, obstruction of justice. My lawyer said I'd probably get 2 to 4 years, maybe less with good behavior, and the fact that I'd turned myself in voluntarily. I'm writing this from my cell at the county jail, waiting for my sentencing hearing next month. The other inmates think I'm crazy when I tell them I can sleep peacefully for the first time in 4 years. They don't understand that prison is nothing compared to being haunted by your own guilt. I kept my promise to David. Sarah came to see me after she got my letter, and while she didn't forgive me, I didn't expect her to. She said it helped to finally know what had happened. The local paper ran a story about David, focusing on his life and dreams rather than just his death. His parents even started a film scholarship in his name at the community college. I haven't seen David since that Halloween night. I think he's finally at peace, able to move on now that the truth has been told. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really there at all, or if he was just my conscience finally finding a voice strong enough to make me listen. But then I remember those calls, the impossible knowledge he had, the way the temperature dropped when he appeared. Real or not, David Chen saved me from a life of running from the truth. He gave me a chance to do the right thing, even if it took the threat of supernatural vengeance to make me take it. The phone in the jail's common area rings sometimes at 3:17 a.m., but it's never for me. David and I have said everything we needed to say to each other. Now I just have to live with the consequences of my choices and somehow find a way to honor the life I took by making something meaningful of the years I have left. It's not forgiveness, I don't deserve that, but maybe, if I'm very lucky, it's something close to redemption.